Before Rome rose to dominate the ancient world, another civilization thrived in the shadows, mysterious, powerful, and deeply influential. The Etruscans built cities, crafted art, and shaped beliefs that Rome would later claim as its own. Yet despite their immense impact, much of their story remains locked away in undeciphered scripts, forgotten rituals, and silent tombs. Who were the Etruscans? Where did they come from? And why did such a remarkable civilization fade into obscurity? Today we journey through myths, archaeology, and history to uncover the entire story of the Etruscans. When we turn the earliest pages of ancient Mediterranean history, the inscriptions carved into stone, the shattered pottery fragments, and the memories preserved by Greeks and Romans, a name suddenly appears: the Etruscans. They step into history like vague shadows, without an introduction, without a clear beginning, as if they had always been there, and yet no one knows where they truly came from. In the 9th century BCE, while the Greek city-states were only just beginning to form in the east, and Rome was still just a cluster of small villages along the Tiber River, the Etruscans had already laid the first foundations of a flourishing society in what we now call Tuscany, but they left us no record of their own origins. Paradoxically, the story of the Etruscans' origins does not begin with themselves, but with the accounts of other peoples. Among them, the most influential voice was Herodotus, the 5th century BCE Greek historian, often called the father of history. He left behind a narrative that was both dramatic and logical. The Etruscans were not native to Italy, but came from Lydia, a kingdom in Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey. Herodotus described a prolonged famine that devastated Lydia for generations, leaving its people in misery. Faced with this desperate situation, the king made a painful decision. He divided his people into two groups. One remained in their homeland, hoping for fortune to change, while the other set sail in search of new lands where they could survive. Leading this migrant group was Prince Tyrrhenus, who guided them across the Mediterranean until they reached the western coast of Italy. There they settled, founded a community, and became known as the Tyrrhenians, the name that would later evolve into Etruscans. This story, both tragic and plausible, was repeated for centuries as unquestioned truth, becoming the default explanation for the origins of a most enigmatic civilization. Not everyone accepted Herodotus's account. Another Greek historian, Dionysius of Halicarnassus, vehemently opposed it and considered the claim entirely mistaken. According to him, the Etruscans had no connection whatsoever to the Lydians, whether in language, religion, marriage customs, or daily cultural life. On the contrary, they possessed distinctive traits that could hardly be found among any other Mediterranean people. For Dionysius, the Etruscans were not migrants, but native Italians who had lived there long before any eastern waves of migration. This perspective not only rejected the credibility of Herodotus's story, but also emphasized the independence and unique identity of the Etruscans in the formation of their civilization. Centuries later, when modern archaeology emerged and excavations began in Tuscany, an important discovery changed the way scholars viewed the origins of the Etruscans. Archaeologists realized that before the rise of the Etruscan civilization, the region had already been home to an older culture, the Villanovan culture. Dating back to the 10th to 9th centuries BCE, Villanovan burials followed a cremation practice. Ashes were placed in ceramic urns and buried underground. The pottery, though simple in form, displayed refined craftsmanship, and the evidence suggested tribal communities gradually evolving into early urban structures. All of this pointed to a direct connection, a clear predecessor to the Etruscans. From this came the indigenous hypothesis, which argued that the Etruscans did not arrive from elsewhere, but were in fact the descendants of the Villanovans, a native Italian culture that flourished through trade and interaction with the wider Mediterranean world. However, the issue did not end there. Even if we accept that the Etruscans were direct descendants of the Villanovans, the Villanovan culture itself contained many unusual elements that did not fully align with other native groups on the Italian peninsula. Certain funerary practices, ceramic techniques, and traces of metallurgy seemed to carry foreign influences. For this reason, many scholars have suggested that there may have been a small wave of migration from the east, perhaps from Anatolia or the Aegean, bringing with it new technical knowledge and customs. When merged with the local foundation, these influences created a unique synthesis, at once familiar and distinct. Thus, the Etruscans may have been both the children of Italy and the product of distant cultural winds that helped shape their unmistakable identity. Entering the 20th and 21st centuries, modern science opened a new path in the age-old question of the Etruscans' origins, genetics. Ancient DNA analyses taken from Etruscan remains unearthed in tombs across Tuscany quickly ignited heated debate. Some studies revealed genetic markers with notable similarities to populations in Anatolia, seemingly reinforcing Herodotus' story of migration from Lydia, yet many other works pointed instead to clear genetic continuity linking Villanovans, Etruscans, and even the modern inhabitants of Tuscany, evidence that supported the indigenous hypothesis. In particular, several genetic datasets highlighted that the Etruscans carried distinct European traits, with very little connection to Lydia. This suggests that if a migration from the east did occur, its scale must have been small and insufficient to alter the demographic foundation that already existed in the region. Discoveries in genetics made the picture of the Etruscans even more complex. For DNA reflects only part of the story. Human beings can adopt languages, beliefs, or customs without necessarily undergoing large-scale migrations. The Etruscans illustrate this vividly. They used a writing system and a language entirely different from all surrounding Indo-European tongues. That language might have been a remnant of a very ancient cultural layer that predated the Indo-European expansion, or perhaps a legacy carried from some distant land in the east. Because of this unexplained anomaly, scholars have described them as a linguistic island isolated in the vast ocean of Indo-European languages, an enigmatic exception within the history of the Mediterranean world. The origins of the Etruscans, therefore, are not merely an archaeological puzzle, but open up broader debates about human history. This question touches on the very nature of migration, cultural exchange, and the way societies were formed in prehistoric times. Were the Etruscans evidence of the enduring vitality of an independently developed native culture, or were they proof of early trans-Mediterranean migrations, reflecting regional connections from the very dawn of history? The surviving traces of the Etruscans, from the magnificent tombs at Tarquinia to wall paintings depicting banquets and dances, reveal a civilization that once reached remarkable prosperity. Yet these very remains remain silent when it comes to the question of origins. They reflect a society that once existed and flourished, but they do not explain the path that brought them to the Italian peninsula. The Etruscans appear like a mysterious guest stepping onto the stage of history in splendid attire, yet offering no revelation about the journey that led them there. And so, as we close the first chapter of their story, the The question still hangs in the air, echoing through the millennia. Millennia. Where did the Etruscans truly come from? In the 8th to 7th centuries BCE, when the mystery of the Etruscans' origins was still shrouded like a thick fog, they suddenly stepped out of the darkness to shine over the land now known as Tuscany in central Italy. This was the period that marked their powerful rise, when they affirmed themselves as a true urban civilization. Their strength did not rely solely on fertile plains that provided abundant food, but also on their tight social organization, sharp commercial acumen, and skill in exploiting and processing natural resources. It was precisely the combination of rich land and human ingenuity that laid the foundation for this historic leap forward. During the 8th to 7th centuries BCE, the Etruscans began to establish complex urban centers, far surpassing the tribal villages of the earlier Villanovan period. They built cities with solid defensive walls, spacious public squares, temples for religious ceremonies, organized residential quarters, and vast necropolises laid out like parallel cities for the dead. Tarquinia became a brilliant symbol, with its tombs decorated with colorful wall paintings, reflecting a rich spiritual life where art and faith were deeply intertwined. Cerveteri was renowned for its necropolis, the city of the dead, where monumental stone tombs were carved to imitate the very houses of the living, revealing profound beliefs about the afterlife. Only a few miles from Rome, was not just a wealthy center, but also a formidable military rival, one that often forced early Rome into caution. These cities were not merely places of habitation, but living proof of the Etruscans' superior political power, cultural vitality, and advanced social organization in their formative era. The initial strength of the Etruscans did not come solely from their favorable geographical position, but fundamentally from the abundant natural resources of Tuscany. This region possessed large deposits of copper and iron, essential raw materials of the Iron Age, that determined the development of agriculture, warfare, and craftsmanship. The Etruscans quickly mastered advanced techniques of mining, metallurgy, and forging, producing items that went far beyond basic daily needs. From copper and iron, they crafted efficient agricultural tools that boosted productivity, as well as durable weapons that reinforced their military power. Beyond practicality, Etruscan artisans created refined handicrafts such as small bronze figurines, helmets, mirrors, and ritual objects, all distinguished by their detail and artistry, which were widely traded across the Mediterranean. The combination of rich resources and skilled craftsmanship transformed them into a remarkable economic and cultural force of the ancient world. Not only renowned for their refined craftsmanship, the Etruscans were also known as shrewd merchants who took full advantage of their geographical position and long coastline to expand trade. The land of Tuscany possessed many safe natural harbors, allowing ships to dock easily and turning the region into a bustling hub of commerce. From these port cities, the Etruscans exported copper, iron, and especially pottery. Their distinctive black vases have been found as far as Greece and Carthage, evidence of their vast trading network. In return, they imported wine, olive oil, and a variety of luxury goods, from fine Greek ceramics and ivory from Africa to amber from the distant Baltic. This shows that their commerce was not confined to local exchange, but stretched across the entire Mediterranean, linking north, south, east, and west. As a result, the Etruscans quickly rose as a major maritime power, simultaneously absorbing the achievements of other civilizations while consolidating their own cultural identity and economic strength. In the course of expanding their trade, two powers played a particularly crucial role for the Etruscans: Greece and Carthage, both vital partners and fierce rivals. The Greeks, through their colonies such as Cumae and Neapolis in southern Italy, brought the Etruscans significant influences in pottery techniques, painting styles, and distinctive cultural elements of the Aegean world. Yet at the same time, they were also relentless competitors at sea, as the strategic maritime routes of the Western Mediterranean were highly coveted. Carthage, the powerful Phoenician stronghold in North Africa, held a dual role. On one hand, it allied with the Etruscans in several naval battles to resist Greek pressure. On the other, it was also a formidable rival in the struggle to control key trade routes. Constant encounters with these two forces compelled the Etruscans not only to absorb advanced techniques, but also to sharpen their resilience in order to maintain their position, thereby forging a unique cultural and political identity, one that did not dissolve into others, but instead increasingly asserted its own distinct presence in the ancient world. Politically, the Etruscans chose an organizational model that differed from many contemporary civilizations. Instead of building a vast, centralized empire, they formed a league of 12 city-states, commonly known as the Dodecapolis. Each city-state maintained its own authority, ruled by a king or local leader, protected by sturdy walls, supported by its own army, and sustained by a vibrant urban life. What bound them together, however, was religion and shared rituals, which served both as a spiritual bond and a political foundation. At the heart of this alliance stood the temple of the god Voltumna, where representatives from each city gathered annually to perform common rites and to deliberate on crucial matters such as war, diplomacy, or the balance of power within the region. This model reveals how the Etruscans had a deep awareness of the need for collective cooperation in the face of external threats. While still respecting the identity and autonomy of each community, such a flexible combination created a political system that was both durable and adaptable, enabling the Etruscans to preserve collective strength without losing their internal diversity. The Etruscan alliance system bore both similarities to and differences from the political models of its time. It did not concentrate absolute power as in Egypt or Assyria, where everything was under the control of a single king, nor was it fragmented like many tribal communities that lacked cohesion. Instead, the League of 12 city-states functioned as a collective defensive bloc, while the cities could compete fiercely in terms of economy or influence. They still knew how to cooperate when facing common external threats. This balance between rivalry and unity created a flexible political structure strong enough to protect shared interests while still preserving the identity and autonomy of each city-state, making the Etruscan system one of the most distinctive models of the ancient world. In the 7th to 6th centuries BCE, the Etruscans could be regarded as one of the earliest urbanized civilizations in Europe. While Rome was still only a cluster of small villages along the Tiber River, Etruscan cities such as Tarquinia and Veii had already risen with a completely different appearance: majestic temples built on hilltops, carefully planned street systems, and an aristocratic class that displayed its power through elaborate tombs and lavish banquets. This development reflected a society that had moved beyond a rural, primitive stage to enter a flourishing urban era, becoming a brilliant highlight in the ancient European landscape. Alongside commerce and politics, military strength was an indispensable factor in the rise of the Etruscans. By mastering metallurgical techniques, they produced sharp bronze and iron weapons that made their armies superior to many surrounding rivals. Swords, spears, and sturdy armor not only safeguarded trade routes on both land and sea, but also enabled them to carry out territorial expansions. To the north, the Etruscans advanced into the fertile Po Valley, rich in resources and ideal for agriculture. To the south, they reached Campania, a strategically vital region and also a gateway to rivalry with Greek colonies. By controlling many key cities, the Etruscans transformed into a formidable military power, capable of confronting both the Greeks in the south and the Latin tribes in central Italy, thereby asserting a position of undeniable importance on the ancient Mediterranean map of power. What made the Etruscans truly distinct was not only their political or economic strength, but also the way they organized and shaped social life. Within their city-states, the wealthy aristocracy held power, controlling land and trade, while at the same time acting as patrons of art and religion. Tomb wall paintings reveal a spiritually rich society, where festivals, music, dance, and athletic games formed an essential part of community life. The close interweaving of power, faith, and art created a unique urban identity that set the Etruscans apart from neighboring tribes, who still lived in scattered, semi-nomadic patterns. This was precisely the factor that allowed them to establish themselves as one of the pioneering civilizations of ancient Europe. Looking at the bigger picture, the 8th to 7th centuries BCE can be seen as the golden age of the Etruscans, when they both consolidated their internal strength and expanded their influence outward. This was the period when the League of 12 City-States demonstrated its power as a unique political mechanism, flexible enough to balance the individual interests of each community, yet cohesive enough to confront external threats. Such a structure allowed them to maintain equilibrium against the pressures of Greece, Carthage, and the Latin tribes, while even extending their control over early Rome. As a result, the Etruscans emerged not only as a regional civilization, but also as a force that helped shape the balance of power in the Mediterranean during the early centuries of antiquity. This was the moment when the Etruscans stepped onto the stage of history, no longer just shadows in the dark, but a brilliant force on the Mediterranean map. If political and commercial power fueled the rise of the Etruscans, it was culture and daily life that created the soul of this civilization. The surviving traces from inscribed pottery fragments, tomb frescoes, to exquisite jewelry present us with a unique picture, at once familiar in the Mediterranean world, and yet so distinct that it leaves later generations bewildered. The language of the Etruscans is one of the greatest enigmas of ancient history, both intriguing and challenging to researchers. Around the 7th century BCE, they developed their own writing system, derived from the Greek alphabet, but modified to reflect the unique sounds of their native speech. Inscriptions were typically carved on tombstones, pottery, bronze tablets, and sometimes even everyday objects, showing that writing was not only a ritual tool, but also intertwined with daily life. What makes the Etruscan language such a puzzle is the fact that it does not belong to the Indo-European family, which later came to dominate almost all of Europe. This absolute difference makes it a rare exception in the linguistic landscape of the ancient world. To this day, scholars have managed to decipher only a very small portion, just a few hundred words. Mostly personal names, numbers, kinship terms, and ritual formulas. The rest remains shrouded in darkness. As there is no bilingual text comparable to Egypt's Rosetta Stone to unlock the code, the longest surviving text, the Liber Linteus, was preserved purely by chance, when a linen cloth inscribed with Etruscan writing was reused to wrap an Egyptian mummy with around 200 words. It should have been a golden key, yet even now it cannot be fully translated, leaving scholars at an impasse. This obscurity has fueled many theories. Some suggest that the Etruscans were remnants of a pre-Indo-European language group, surviving from prehistoric times before Indo-European migrations swept across the continent. Others agree with Herodotus, believing they originated in Lydia and carried their language from the east across the sea to Italy. Each theory has its merits, but none is conclusive. Thus, the Etruscan language remains like a locked door, occasionally offering glimpses of tiny fragments, yet steadfastly refusing to reveal the full story of a people who once flourished in the heart of the Mediterranean. The religion of the Etruscans was not merely a belief system, but a mirror reflecting their distinctive worldview, in which every aspect of human existence was tied to a script predetermined by the gods. They believed that the fate of each individual, and even the rise or fall of an entire nation, had already been written in advance. To them, the universe was not a random stream of events, but a meticulously composed play, in which humans could only perceive and obey, without the power to alter it. This deep conviction in determinism formed the foundation of their entire religious and ritual system. To decipher the will of heaven, the Etruscans relied on a special priestly class known as haruspices, diviners of sacrifice. They specialized in examining the entrails of animals, especially the liver, which they believed to be a miniature model of the cosmos. Each section of the liver corresponded to a deity or supernatural force. When a sheep was sacrificed, the shape and condition of its liver were interpreted as a direct message from the gods, a sign of satisfaction, a warning of anger, or permission to proceed or delay an action. Based on these signs, the haruspices advised rulers and nobles on weighty decisions, from waging war and forging alliances to conducting state rituals. What is remarkable is that this practice did not vanish with the Etruscans, but was carried over almost intact into Roman culture. Though the Romans were famed for their pragmatism, they still retained haruspices in the imperial court, demonstrating the strong Etruscan influence on Mediterranean religious political life beyond entrail divination. The Etruscans also read divine will through natural phenomena such as lightning, storms, and the flight of birds. Every sign in the sky was regarded as a command from the divine. From this emerged a tightly woven religious system, both mystical and systematic, by ancient standards, where faith, observation, and ritual blended together to form one of Europe's earliest theologies. When entering Etruscan tombs at Tarquinia or Cerveteri, one is immediately surrounded by colorful frescoes. Unlike the somber murals of Egyptian tombs, these are vibrant and lively. The Etruscans portrayed themselves at banquets, where men and women reclined together, raised wine cups, listened to musicians playing double flutes, and watched dancers spin gracefully. This reveals their love for music and dance, which were essential not only in religious rituals, but also in daily life. The dead, according to their beliefs, would continue to enjoy feasts and music in the afterlife. Thus, the murals served both as memory and as promise. Etruscan artisans were also renowned for their bronze and gold work. Bronze mirrors were engraved with delicate designs, while golden jewelry, crafted with the fine granulation technique, reached a level of perfection that testified to the skill of their craftsmen and the wealth of their nobility. Many of these objects were later collected by Romans and became treasures in aristocratic households. The Etruscans also cast large bronze statues, sometimes several meters tall. Sadly, most were melted down during Roman times for reuse, but ancient records say they once astonished Greek visitors. This shows that the Etruscans were not only skilled craftsmen, but also creative artists, enriching the art of the Mediterranean world. One of the most surprising aspects of Etruscan life was the special status of women, something almost unheard of in other civilizations of the time. In Greece, women were confined to the inner quarters, absent from public life, and in ancient Rome, they played only a secondary role within the household. In contrast, in Etruria, women appeared openly in the most important social spaces. Tomb frescoes depict them dining alongside men, reclining on the same banquet couches (clenae), raising wine cups, and engaging in conversation. These were not random images, but reflections of a society where women had the right to be present, to share in joy, and to have a voice in the community. On tomb inscriptions, a wife's name was often clearly engraved, and in some cases, her family name was placed on equal footing with her husband's, evidence that she was recognized as an individual in her own right, not merely as someone's wife. This level of equality was difficult for Greek and Roman authors to accept. They mocked and described Etruscan women as too free or too indulgent. Yet through a modern lens, this stands as clear proof that Etruscan society was far more progressive than its neighbors, laying the foundation for a rare form of gender balance in the ancient world. Taken together, the mysterious language, mystical religion, vibrant art, and the remarkable status of women formed a unique cultural portrait. In the ancient Mediterranean, where Greece boasted philosophy, Rome prided itself on law, and Egypt on pyramids, the Etruscans asserted themselves with a way of life that was mysterious, humanistic, and devoted to the enjoyment of life. And perhaps it was precisely this difference that made them admired yet misunderstood, deeply influential to Rome, yet gradually dissolved into the heart of the rising empire. If trade, art, and religion reflected the softer side of Etruscan civilization, then military strength and political ambition revealed its hard and uncompromising face. In a Mediterranean world full of conflicts, no community could endure for long if it only knew how to exchange goods without defending its interests through force. The Etruscans understood this well, and with abundant iron ore from Tuscany combined with advanced weapon forging skills, they quickly built a formidable army, not stopping at the mainland. They also developed a powerful fleet that reached across the Tyrrhenian Sea, asserting their position as a force that could wield both the hammer and the sword. Merchants and artists fused with the image of seasoned warriors. In the 7th and 6th centuries BC, while major powers, such as the Greeks, were establishing colonies along the southern coast of Italy, and Carthage was expanding from North Africa, the Etruscans also entered a period of vigorous expansion both northward and southward. They took control of the fertile Po Valley, considered the granary of the peninsula, while also securing routes leading to the Alps, the gateway for trade with Central Europe. To the south, they pushed into Campania, establishing influence over prosperous cities such as Capua and turning them into important centers of their domain. This expansion was not only supported by infantry armed with bronze and iron, but also by a powerful navy. The Tyrrhenian Sea was once named after them, Mare Tyrrhenum, reflecting the extent of their dominance over the waters. Greek sources describe the Etruscans as formidable opponents, sometimes feared as pirates, other times sought as strategic allies in conflicts against rival powers. It was this combination of territorial control, maritime supremacy, and protection of trade that enabled the Etruscans not only to preserve their prosperity, but also to extend their influence widely across the Italian peninsula. Among the political achievements of the Etruscans, their control over Rome stands as the clearest evidence of their vision and ambition. In the 6th century BC, Rome was still just a small Latin town on the banks of the Tiber. Yet its geographical position was extremely strategic, located on the main route connecting northern and southern Italy, and serving as a crossroads between the sea and the inland. To hold Rome meant to control the entire passage into central Italy, thereby opening the opportunity to dominate a vast region. The Etruscans quickly recognized this value, not only exerting influence, but directly placing Rome under their rule. During this period, 3 kings bearing strong Etruscan imprints reigned in succession, building essential infrastructure, strengthening the military, and reforming society. This deep intervention transformed Rome from a modest settlement into a rising center, while leaving an indelible Etruscan mark on the formation of the city's political and cultural identity. Tarquinius Priscus, believed to be of Etruscan origin from the city of Tarquinii, ascended the throne of Rome around 616 BC and became one of the figures who laid the foundations for the city's rise. During his reign, Rome entered a stage of systematic development with a series of major public works. The most notable was the Cloaca Maxima, a massive drainage system that improved sanitation and paved the way for future urban planning. Beyond infrastructure, he also promoted territorial expansion, transforming Rome from a small town into a regional power, with policies that focused both on internal development and outward growth. Tarquinius Priscus established Rome as an emerging center of power, while clearly reflecting the organizational skills and advanced techniques of the Etruscans. Servius Tullius, the successor of Tarquinius Priscus, though surrounded by many legendary accounts regarding his origins, is regarded by most historians as having Etruscan roots and leaving an important legacy in Roman history. Unlike his predecessor, who focused heavily on infrastructure and territorial expansion, Servius became notable for his far-reaching military and social reforms. He introduced the classification of citizens based on wealth and status, dividing them into units called centuriae, which not only made the army more efficient, but also created Rome's first community-oriented political system. This was a major step forward, as power was no longer concentrated solely in the hands of the aristocracy, but gradually extended to other social groups, laying the groundwork for Rome's more complex political structure in the future. Through these reforms, Rome not only strengthened its military power, but also established a stable socio-political framework, providing the foundation for its long-term development. Tarquinius Superbus, the last king of Rome's monarchy, was the clearest embodiment of Etruscan influence in the city's formative period. He is best known for constructing the great temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus on the Capitoline Hill, a monumental religious structure that not only symbolized political authority, but also revealed the deep integration of Etruscan art and ritual into Roman life. Yet alongside such grand projects, his reign became synonymous with tyranny, cruelty, and alienation from the people. Ancient sources describe him as ruling through fear, suppressing dissent, and driving growing resentment among both citizens and the aristocracy. This authoritarian rule eventually sparked widespread resistance, culminating in his overthrow by the Romans in 509 BC. That event not only ended the Tarquin dynasty, but also abolished the monarchy altogether, ushering in the Republic, a decisive turning point in Rome's history. Thus, it can be said that early Rome was Rome under the shadow of the Etruscans. From political systems, urban architecture, to religious rituals, all bore the imprint of the Etruscans. Rome learned much from them, and then used those very lessons to build its own power. The seeds of conflict between Rome and the Etruscans were in fact sown during the period when the Etruscans directly intervened and imposed their rule over Rome. While under their control, Rome absorbed much in politics, architecture, and ritual practices. Yet this deep domination simultaneously stirred the Romans' sense of pride and independence. Thus, once Rome regained its freedom, it would never again accept becoming a vassal. The overthrow of Tarquinius Superbus in 509 BC not only ended the last dynasty of foreign kings, but also served as a powerful declaration of independence, affirming Rome's readiness to step into a new era. Following this event, armed conflicts quickly erupted, most fiercely with Veii, the wealthiest and most powerful Etruscan city-state, located just near Rome. Veii had once stood as a symbol of Etruscan power, but for nearly a century afterward, it became Rome's perpetual enemy, engaging in constant clashes. The struggle dragged on, to the point where the Romans had to conduct a 10-year siege, and only in 396 BC, under the command of General Camillus, did Rome finally achieve a decisive victory, completely conquering Veii. This triumph not only eliminated a major rival, but also marked a historic turning point. From this moment, Rome began its path of expansion across the Italian peninsula, while the Etruscan city-states entered a period of decline, losing their role as a dominant power. Paradoxically, before this, Rome and the Etruscans had shared cooperative ties through marriage, trade, and even military alliances against common foes. But once Rome matured, it no longer needed Etruscan protection. With its pragmatic political nature, Rome swiftly shifted from ally to rival, the Etruscans. Although they had once formed a league of 12 city-states, in reality were bound only by a loose alliance without any centralized authority to coordinate their collective strength. Each city-state placed its own interests above all else, prioritizing trade relations or local disputes rather than uniting against external enemies. As Rome gradually grew stronger and launched step-by-step attacks into Etruscan territory, this lack of cooperation became evident. The city-states were assaulted, but received little comprehensive aid from their allies. Since none were willing to sacrifice immediate interests for a collective goal, this fatal weakness allowed Rome to exploit the situation with ease, defeating its rivals one by one and expanding its influence. While the Etruscans steadily declined, crippled by internal divisions they could never overcome. The power of the Etruscans over Rome can be compared to a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it allowed them to expand their influence, planting their cultural and political seeds into a city full of potential. But on the other hand, their imposed rule caused the Romans to nurture a deep resentment. Rome absorbed much from the Etruscans, from construction techniques, artistic traditions, and religious rituals, to models of social organization, yet they never forgot that this knowledge was once tied to the domination of foreign kings. That very memory became the driving force for Rome, once strong enough to break free and turn the Etruscans into the first target of its expansionist ambitions. Thus, what the Etruscans passed down not only helped Rome grow stronger, but also unintentionally created an eternal enemy of their own. Power and conflict were truly two inseparable sides of Etruscan history, and their relationship with Rome is the clearest proof of this. The Etruscans once held dominion, passing on to Rome knowledge of politics, warfare, religion, and art, helping shape the city in its earliest days. Yet it was precisely this imposed rule that turned Rome into a determined enemy bent on overthrowing them. When Rome matured, it not only regained its freedom, but also used the very lessons learned from the Etruscans to defeat and replace them. In this sense, Rome can be seen both as the child deeply marked by Etruscan influence and as the executioner that pushed their civilization into obscurity. That clash opened a new chapter for the Mediterranean, where Rome rose with imperial ambition, while the Etruscans faded into a dim memory in the flow of history. No civilization lasts forever. For the Etruscans, the brilliance of the 7th and 6th centuries BCE soon had to give way to harsh trials from the 5th century onward. If their golden age was when they expanded across the Mediterranean, built powerful city-states, and controlled early Rome, then the 5th century opened a tragic chapter: external pressures, internal divisions, and ultimately absorption into a rising new empire, Rome. The decline of the Etruscans began in the very realm that had once given them their greatest strength, the sea. The Tyrrhenian Sea, once bearing their name, had been the stage where the Etruscan fleet roamed freely, controlling vital trade routes that linked the northern and southern Mediterranean, while extending their influence into southern Italy. The Etruscan city-states grew wealthy through maritime dominance, protecting merchants and imposing authority on coastal regions. Yet in 474 BCE, the balance of power shifted dramatically when a new alliance arose: Syracuse, one of the Greek overseas powers, joined forces with the city-state of Cumae in Campania. The naval battle at Cumae was not merely a clash of arms, it was a fateful turning point. The Etruscan fleet, long accustomed to supremacy, suffered a crushing defeat at the hands of the Greek alliance. Warships that had symbolized Etruscan power and prosperity were sunk or captured, transforming the sea from their familiar domain into a space where they no longer held control. From that moment, the Greeks gradually took over maritime supremacy, while Carthage seized the opportunity to expand its presence, reducing the Etruscans from rulers of the sea to outsiders on the strategic stage. That defeat was nothing less than a mortal wound, cutting deep into the economic lifeline of the Etruscans. Deprived of the ability to protect their trade routes, the city-states lost enormous profits once derived from commerce ranging from precious metals, wine, and olive oil to the slave trade. The decline of trade also meant that political and military power, once sustained by abundant financial resources, began to falter. Cities that had once flourished through international connections gradually lost their standing and slipped into an irreversible spiral of decline. While at sea, the Etruscans had to yield to the Greeks. From the north, another threat descended: the Gauls, nomadic Celtic tribes originating in Central Europe. They migrated in large waves into the Po River plain, bringing with them a warlike lifestyle, accustomed to raids and conquests. For the Etruscans, who had already expanded northward to exploit the fertile lands rich in agriculture and lying along vital trade routes, the arrival of the Gauls was nothing short of an inevitable disaster. Northern cities gradually lost control. Many were repeatedly ravaged, and both the economy and social life fell into instability. More dangerously, The Gauls not only seized territory, but also undermined the spirit of the Etruscans, a society built upon the stability of city-states, upon urban wealth and power, suddenly had to confront enemies who did not follow traditional rules of warfare. The Gaulish warbands, mobile, unpredictable, and ruthless, spread fear deep into the heart of Etruria. This impact went beyond military losses. It was a direct blow to the confidence and social order of the Etruscans, leaving them progressively weaker and less capable of resisting the rising powers around them. For centuries, Rome clashed repeatedly with the Etruscan city-states. One of the most powerful Etruscan cities, was its most persistent rival. The war with Veii lasted nearly 100 years, finally ending in 396 BCE with a decisive Roman victory. The fall of Veii warned all of Etruria that Rome had left its fragile youth behind. Rome did not stop there. They conquered Etruscan cities one by one, not all at once, but patiently, like a Go player surrounding territory. Once a city fell, Rome quickly absorbed it into their alliance or colonial system, stripping the Etruscan League of its collective resistance. By the 4th and 3rd centuries BCE, the Etruscans no longer held the initiative as they once had in their golden age, the time when they expanded across the Mediterranean, controlled commerce, and even reigned supreme over the Tyrrhenian Sea had become nothing more than a distant memory. They no longer had the capacity to launch new conquests, nor the strength to impose their influence abroad. Instead, they were trapped in a defensive struggle, desperately clinging to what territory remained under relentless pressure from the Greeks, the Gauls, and the rising power of Rome. The weakening came not only from outside, but also from within. With trade routes severed, the city-states lost the wealth that had once sustained their luxurious aristocracy, a society that had thrived on prosperity to sponsor art, religion, and politics was now forced to face scarcity. Art and religion still existed, but they no longer carried the same vibrant energy. Tomb frescoes no longer showed lively scenes of banquets, wine, and music. Instead, they depicted darker imagery filled with pessimism about an uncertain future. By the 3rd century BCE, the reality was undeniable. Rome had far outstripped the Etruscans in every respect, not only in military power, with its disciplined armies and long-term strategies, but also in social organization, where Rome demonstrated the strength of a tightly structured and efficient political system. Against such might, the Etruscans gradually lost their ability to resist and were forced to accept assimilation into the vast machinery of Rome. Military conquest was only the beginning. More important was assimilation. Rome, ever pragmatic, did not erase the Etruscans completely, but absorbed them. The Etruscan language disappeared. By the 1st century BCE, hardly anyone spoke it. Their script fell into oblivion, surviving only on a few tombstones and artifacts. Etruscan religion blended into Roman mythology. Rituals such as liver divination and thunder observation continued under Roman practice. The god Voltumna and many other Etruscan deities transformed into new forms within the Roman pantheon. Their artistic culture was also drawn into the greater Roman stream. Metalworking, jewelry making, and stone tomb construction all became part of Roman art. Through this process, the Etruscans slowly lost their distinct identity. There was no genocide, no single cataclysm, just gradual absorption. Perhaps this was the quietest yet most certain death of a civilization not erased at once, but no longer leaving an independent trace. By the late 3rd century BCE, When Rome completed its conquest of the Italian peninsula, the Etruscans were only a fragment within the larger Roman picture. They had once ruled the seas, once governed Rome, once produced radiant art and a unique language. But now, only silent tombs remained, indecipherable inscriptions, and scattered memories in Greek and Roman texts. The decline of the Etruscans reminds us power is never permanent. Seas can change masters, trade can collapse, and even a small city like Rome can rise as the successor. The Etruscans did not vanish for lack of talent, but because they were not united and could not adapt quickly enough to ever-growing challenges. A civilization may disappear politically, dissolving into the current of a greater empire, yet its cultural traces often remain imprinted somewhere. For the Etruscans, although they were absorbed by Rome from the 3rd century BC, what remains is still enough to remind humanity that here once existed a unique people who cast a long shadow over the history of the Mediterranean. Yet their legacy is full of paradox, rich in artifacts but poor in narrative, brilliant in traces, yet obscure in origin. To trace the Etruscans in the present, one must descend into the vast necropolises they left behind. At Tarquinia, Cerveteri, Chiusi, and many other cities, these cities of the dead stretch across hectares, with thousands of tombs arranged in clusters like an underground metropolis. The burial chambers were carved deep into the rock or built as solid blocks, some even imitating the architecture of houses, evoking the sense that the dead continued their lives in another realm. Stepping down into these spaces feels like entering an inverted Rome, a city dedicated entirely to spirits and memory. On the walls of these tombs, vivid paintings come to life, depicting both daily activities and sacred rituals, lavish banquets with wine, music, and dancing, performers twirling to the sound of flutes, athletes in competition, and images of the deceased crossing the threshold into the afterlife. What stands out is that these paintings do not carry the darkness or sorrow often associated with death, but are instead filled with vitality, joy, and continuity. For the Etruscans, death was not an end, but a door opening onto an eternal feast, where existence never ceased. Thanks to these images, Etruscan tombs have become an invaluable source, allowing later generations to better understand how they perceived life and death, as well as the dreams they enshrined in their eternal art. Beyond the tombs, with their wall paintings and distinctive architecture, the material legacy of the Etruscans also survives in countless treasures now displayed in museums across Europe. Most striking are the exquisite gold ornaments, necklaces, earrings, and pins crafted with the technique of granulation, in which tiny gold beads were fused onto the surface to form intricate and delicate patterns. This was a method demanding absolute precision, to the point that even modern goldsmiths, equipped with advanced tools, still acknowledge the mastery and remarkable skill of Etruscan artisans. These patterns not only reveal refined aesthetic sensibilities, but also reflect social status and spiritual beliefs embodied in each piece of jewelry. Equally remarkable are the bronze statues, a field in which the Etruscans once excelled brilliantly. Although most of the large works were melted down by the Romans to reuse the metal, the surviving statues are still enough to demonstrate their exceptional craftsmanship. Many smaller pieces depict deities, animals, or mythological figures, carrying with them a rich imagination and a profound faith in the supernatural. Especially noteworthy are bronze mirrors engraved with mythological scenes, which served not only as everyday objects, but also as unique works of art, illustrating how beauty and daily life were closely intertwined. These artifacts, though scattered, silent, and lacking a direct narrative, still quietly convey a message. The Etruscans were once true masters of craftsmanship, a people whose artistic creativity stood on par with that of the Greeks, leaving behind an indelible aesthetic mark on the history of the Mediterranean. If we only look at the scattered artifacts that remain, we might mistakenly believe the Etruscans existed merely as a small fragment on the margins of history. In reality, however, their most important legacy lies within Rome itself, the very power that assimilated them and caused their disappearance. In religion, the Romans directly adopted many Etruscan rituals and methods of divination to interpret the will of the gods, examining the livers of sacrificed animals, observing lightning to predict fate, and dividing the heavens into regions ruled by different deities. Quite a few Roman gods, in fact, had roots in the Etruscan pantheon, later renamed and Romanized over time. In politics and architecture, the Etruscan kings who once ruled Rome built sewers, temples, and defensive walls, foundational works that allowed Rome to grow into a powerful city. Even the Roman triumph, the iconic ritual celebrating victory and authority, was very likely derived from Etruscan tradition. Linguistically, though the Etruscan language disappeared, fragments of its vocabulary survived within Latin, especially in religious and ceremonial contexts. One could say that part of what we now call Rome was, in truth, the Etruscans cloaked in Latin form. Yet because Rome became so immense and all-encompassing in history, the name of the Etruscans gradually faded, surviving only as a shadow behind the empire's unending brilliance. And yet, there lies a painful paradox. We know the Etruscans through objects, but not through their own voice. No epics, no chronicles, no philosophers or writers left works behind. Their entire story, their origins, their language, their worldview has fallen into silence. Their language, as mentioned, remains undeciphered except for a few words. Their worldview, though reflected somewhat through religion and art, lacks direct explanation. For this reason, the Etruscans remain a people unable to tell their own story. They appear through the eyes of Greeks and Romans, and through shards of pottery and paintings, but their own voice has vanished. Perhaps the greatest legacy of the Etruscans is not their tombs or jewelry, but their mysterious silence. It sets them apart from the Greeks, whose philosophers and poets left thousands of written pages, and from the Romans, whose laws and literature filled volumes. This silence forces later generations to search, to guess, to debate, and thus the Etruscans continue to exert a special fascination. In the ancient world, many civilizations collapsed, but the Etruscans are unique. They dissolved into Rome, yet left indelible traces, while remaining themselves in shadow, like a picture with only outlines left, forever provoking curiosity about the colors it once had. Today, when we stand before the painted tomb walls of Tarquinia, or gaze upon a golden earring in a museum case, we see not only art, but also hear the echo of a vanished civilization. They remind us that greatness does not guarantee permanence, and that sometimes history's memory is written only in silence. The Etruscans were once the teachers of Rome, once the masters of the Tyrrhenian Sea, once creators of a society where women had a voice, artists were honored, and religion governed destiny. But all of that now survives only in fragments. And from those fragments, humanity continues to search for answers to a question never resolved. Who were they? And why did they disappear in such a way